Jake Morrison heard the screaming before he saw the monsters. He was fixing a broken air filter in the basement of the research station when the first sounds of terror echoed through the metal walls above him. The tool in his hand dropped too, the floor with a loud clang as he froze, listening to the chaos that had suddenly erupted in his quiet world. The screaming was not normal. It was the kind of sound people made when they faced something so horrible that their minds could not process it. Jake had never heard anything like it before, and it made his blood turn cold in his veins. He climbed the maintenance ladder quickly, his heart beating fast against his chest. When he reached the main level, he could hear heavy footsteps running through the corridors. People were shouting orders, but their voices were filled with panic. Someone was firing a weapon, but the shots stopped after only a few seconds. Jake pressed his ear against the maintenance door and listened. The sounds were getting closer. Whatever was happening, it was moving through the station like a wave of destruction. His hands shook as he reached for the door handle, but something in his mind told him to wait. Through the small window in the door, he saw Amy Carter running down the hallway. She was the head of security for the station, and Jake had never seen her look afraid of anything. But now her face was white with terror, and blood was streaming from cuts on her arms. She was looking over her shoulder as she ran, as if something was chasing her. That something appeared a moment later. Jake had to bite his tongue to keep from crying out when he saw it. The creature was huge, at least 8 feet tall, with long arms that ended in claws as sharp as knives. Its skin was dark gray and covered with scales that looked like armor. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, but twisted into something evil. Its eyes glowed with a yellow light, and its mouth was full of teeth that could tear through metal. The monster caught Amy before she could reach the emergency exit. Jake watched in horror as those terrible claws lifted her off the ground. He wanted to help her, but his body would not move. He could only watch as the creature examined her like she was some kind of prize. It made a sound that might have been laughter, a deep rumbling noise that made Jake's bones ache. Then the monster did something that made Jake's stomach turn. It pulled out a small device and pointed it at Amy. A red light scanned her from head to toe, and the device made a series of beeps. The creature looked at the screen and made that laughing sound again. It was recording her, studying her, like she was an animal in a zoo. Amy tried to fight back, but she might as well have been fighting a mountain. The creature held her easily with one hand, while it continued to scan her with the device. When it was finished, it looked directly at the maintenance door where Jake was hiding. For one terrible moment, Jake thought it had seen him. But the creature turned away and carried Amy deeper into the station. Jake waited in the maintenance room for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sounds of fighting and screaming continued throughout the station, but they were getting fewer and more distant. When everything finally became quiet, the silence was somehow worse than the noise had been. He knew he should stay hidden, but he had to know what had happened to the other people in the station. There were over 300 people living and working in Colony 7. They were scientists, engineers, farmers, and their families. Many of them were his friends. He could not just hide while they were in danger. Jake opened the maintenance door slowly and looked out into the hallway. The lights were flickering, and some of them were completely dark. The floor was covered with things he did not want to look at too closely. He could see claw marks in the metal walls, gouges so deep they went almost all the way through to the other side. He moved carefully through the corridors, staying close to the walls and listening for any sound that might warn him of danger. Every few steps, he found signs of what had happened. A torn piece of clothing here, a broken tool there, drops of blood that made a trail leading toward the main part of the station. In the cafeteria, Jake found Ben Clark sitting against the wall. Ben was the station administrator, a kind man who always had time to talk to anyone who needed help. But now Ben was not moving, and his eyes stared at nothing. The same red scanning device lay on the floor next to him, still blinking with a soft light. Jake picked up the device and looked at its screen. He could not read the strange symbols, but he could see images. Pictures of humans. Hundreds of them. Each picture had numbers and symbols next to it, like some kind of catalog. With growing horror, Jake realized what he was looking at. These creatures were not just killing humans. They were collecting them. A sound from the corridor made Jake drop the device and run for the nearest hiding place. He squeezed into a storage closet just as heavy footsteps approached the cafeteria. Through a crack in the door, he watched as 3 of the monsters entered the room. They were different sizes, but they all had the same terrible appearance. The largest one, with scars covering its face and arms, seemed to be their leader. The scarred creature picked up the scanning device and looked at Ben's body. It made a series of sounds in a language Jake did not understand, but the tone was clearly one of satisfaction. This was not random violence. These creatures had come here with a purpose, and they were completing their mission with the efficiency of professional soldiers. The leader looked around the cafeteria, and Jake was sure it was searching for something. Its yellow eyes swept across every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place. When its gaze passed over the storage closet, Jake held his breath and prayed that the darkness would hide him. After what felt like forever, the creatures left the cafeteria. But Jake could still hear them moving through other parts of the station. They were methodical, checking every room, every corridor, every possible place where a human might be hiding. They were not in a hurry. They had all the time in the world. To complete their hunt, Jake spent the next 3 days hiding in the maintenance tunnels beneath the station. He had access to the security cameras from there, and he forced himself to watch what was happening above. He watched as the creatures hunted down every human in the station. He watched as they scanned each victim with their devices. He watched as they collected their trophies and stored them in their ship. By the end of the 3rd day, Jake Morrison was the only human left alive in Colony 7. 346 people had lived in the station when the monsters arrived. Now there was only him, hiding in the darkness like a rat, afraid to make a sound that might give away his location. On the 4th day, the creatures began to leave. Jake watched through the cameras as they loaded their ship with the things they had taken. The scarred leader was the last aboard. Before entering the ship, it turned and looked directly at one of the security cameras. Jake knew somehow that the creature was looking at him. Even though it could not see him, it knew he was there. The creature held up one clawed hand and pointed at the camera. Then it drew that same claw across its throat in a gesture that needed no translation. The message was clear. This was not over. The hunt would continue. When the rescue ship finally arrived a week later, they found Jake Morrison sitting in the ruins of the cafeteria, staring at the spot where Ben Clark had died. He was the sole survivor of the worst massacre in human colonial history. But as the alien ships disappeared into the darkness of space, Jake made a promise to himself and to the dead. When they came back, he would be ready. Jake Morrison woke up screaming again. The same nightmare visited him every night for 2 months after the rescue. He would see Amy Carter running down that hallway, her face twisted with terror. He would watch Ben Clark die over and over again. But worst of all, he would see those yellow eyes staring at him through the security camera, promising that the hunt was not finished. The doctors at the Earth Medical Center said he had trauma from surviving the attack. They gave him pills to help him sleep and pills to help him stay calm during the day. They told him that time would heal his wounds and that he should try to forget what happened on Colony 7. But Jake did not want to forget. He wanted to remember everything. While the doctors tried to fix his mind, Jake was making different plans. He spent his days in the medical center's library, reading everything he could find about the creatures that had attacked his home. The official reports called them Krillians. They were a species of hunters who traveled from planet to planet, looking for new types of prey to add to their collections. The more Jake learned about the Krillians, the more he understood how hopeless the situation was for humans. The Krillians were stronger, faster, and more deadly than any human could ever be. Their skin was like armor, their claws could cut through steel, and their senses were so sharp they could track a target across miles of empty space. Humans were just soft, weak creatures to them, easy prey. But Jake refused to accept that. If humans were going to survive, they needed to become something more than just prey. They needed to evolve. After 3 months in the medical center, Jake was released back into the world. But instead of going home to his family on Earth, he traveled to the research station on Mars, where Dr. Lisa Harper worked. Lisa was a scientist who studied alien biology, and she had written several papers about Krillian anatomy and behavior. Jake needed her help to become something the Krillians would not expect. Lisa Harper was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, but when Jake told her what he wanted to do, those eyes became very serious. She listened to his story about Colony 7 and his plans for revenge. When he finished talking, she was quiet for a long time. "What you're asking for is not just dangerous," she finally said. "It's never been done before. We don't know what it would do to your body or your mind. You could die, or worse, you could become something that is no longer human." Jake looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death. "I'm already not human anymore. Those things took that away from me when they killed my friends. Now I want to take something away from them." Lisa studied his face and saw the determination there. She had spent her career studying alien species, and she knew that the Krillians would never stop hunting humans. If someone could find a way to fight back, it might save millions of lives. After a week of thinking, she agreed to help him. The first step was to understand exactly how the Krillians were so much better than humans. Lisa had samples of Krillian tissue from previous encounters, and she studied them carefully under her microscopes. She found that their muscles were 3 times denser than human muscles. Their bones were reinforced with a metal-like substance that made them almost impossible to break. Their nervous system processed information twice as fast as a human brain. "If we're going to make you able to fight them," Lisa explained, "we need to change your body at the most basic level. We need to rewrite your genetic code." The process took 2 years. Every few weeks, Jake would return to Lisa's laboratory for another treatment. She would inject him with modified viruses that carried new genetic information into his cells. Slowly, his body began to change. The first changes were small. His reflexes became faster. His vision became sharper. His muscles grew stronger without him doing any exercise. But as the treatments continued, the changes became more dramatic. His bones became harder and denser. His skin became tougher, like leather. His nervous system began to process information at incredible speeds. But the physical changes were only part of what Jake needed. He also had to learn to think like a Krillian. Lisa had recordings of their language from various encounters, and Jake spent hours every day learning to understand their words. He studied their hunting techniques, their social structure, and their honor codes. He learned that they valued cunning and patience above brute strength. The hardest part was learning to be patient. Jake wanted to rush out and find the creatures that had destroyed his life, but Lisa reminded him that the Krillians had been hunting for thousands of years. If he wanted to beat them, he needed to be smarter than they were, not just stronger. During his second year of treatments, Jake began training his new body. He could lift weights that would have crushed him before. He could run for hours without getting tired. His reaction time was so fast that he could catch flies out of the air with his bare hands. But most importantly, he could think and plan in ways that no normal human could. Lisa installed neural implants in his brain that connected him to computer systems. With these implants, Jake could access information instantly and control electronic devices just by thinking about them. He could see through security cameras, control automatic weapons, and hack into computer networks without touching a keyboard. The final change was the most dramatic. Lisa replaced his eyes with artificial ones that could see in many different types of light. He could see heat signatures, detect movement in complete darkness, and zoom in on targets from miles away. When the surgery was finished, Jake's eyes glowed with a soft blue light, like the targeting systems on advanced weapons. "How do you feel?" Lisa asked him after the final treatment. Jake looked at his hands, which were now covered with skin that looked almost metallic. He could feel the strength flowing through his new muscles and the speed of his enhanced nervous system. But most of all, he could feel the cold anger that had been growing inside him for 2 years. "I feel ready," he said. Word of Jake's transformation reached the Earth Defense Corps, and Captain Ruth Sanders came to visit him. She was a career military officer who had been fighting aliens for 20 years, and she had never seen anything like what Jake had become. "We could use someone like you in our forces," she told him. "The Krillians are attacking more colonies every month. We need every advantage we can get." But Jake shook his head. "This isn't about winning a war. This is personal. They made it personal when they came to my home and killed my friends." Captain Sanders looked at him with respect and a little fear. "What are you planning to do?" Jake smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. "I'm going to wait for them to come back. And when they do, I'm going to show them that humans can hunt too." After Captain Sanders left, Jake returned to Colony 7. The station had been rebuilt, and new colonists had moved in to replace the ones who had died. But Jake did not live with them. Instead, he made his home in the same maintenance tunnels, where he had hidden during the attack. He knew that the Krillians would return someday to finish what they had started. When they did, they would find that their prey had evolved into something they never expected. Jake Morrison was no longer human, but he was no longer helpless either. He had become something new, something designed specifically to hunt the hunters. And he was patient enough to wait as long as it took for his chance at revenge. Jake Morrison had been living in the shadows of Colony 7 for 3 years when the warning came. Deep space sensors detected 3 large ships moving toward the outer colonies, and the signature matched Krillian hunting vessels. The message was clear. They were coming back. Jake received the alert through his neural implants while he was working in the maintenance tunnels beneath the colony. The new colonists above him had no idea he was there. They went about their daily lives, farming and researching and raising their children, completely unaware that death was approaching from the stars. The colony administrator was a man named Ben Walsh, and he was nothing like the Ben Clark who had died in the first attack. Walsh was nervous and careful, always worrying about security and emergency procedures. He had read the reports about what happened to the original colony, and he lived in constant fear that it would happen again. Jake watched Walsh through the security cameras as he called an emergency meeting. The man's hands were shaking as he told the colonists about the approaching ships. Some people wanted to evacuate immediately. Others wanted to stay and fight. But Jake knew that neither option would work. The Krillians were too good at hunting. If people ran, they would be caught. If they fought with normal weapons, they would be slaughtered. But the colonists did not know about Jake. They did not know that their colony was protected by something that the Krillians had never encountered before. Jake had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Every corridor in the colony had been modified with hidden sensors and weapons. Every room had escape routes that only he knew about. The entire station had been turned into a trap, and Jake was the spider waiting at the center of his web. The security chief was a woman named Amy Davis, and she reminded Jake painfully of the Amy Carter who had died in the first attack. Davis tried to organize the colonists into defensive positions, but Jake could see through the cameras that her hands were shaking just as much as Walsh's. These people were not soldiers. They were just ordinary humans trying to live their lives in peace. Jake activated his communication system and sent a message to the colony's main computer. Words appeared on every screen in the station. Stay in your quarters. Lock your doors. Do not come out no matter what you hear. You will be safe. The message was not signed, but Jake knew that some of the older colonists would guess who had sent it. There were rumors about a ghost who lived in the tunnels, a survivor from the first attack who watched over the new colonists. Most people thought it was just a story, but a few suspected it might be true. The Krillian ships entered orbit around Colony 7 2 days later. Jake watched them through the long-range sensors, and he felt a cold satisfaction when he recognized the lead. Vessel. It was the same ship that had attacked the colony 5 years ago. The same ship that had carried away the bodies of his friends. The lead ship was larger than the others, and Jake's enhanced eyes could see the trophies mounted on its hull. Skulls and bones from dozens of different species, displayed like decorations on a war machine. But most of the trophies were human skulls, and Jake wondered if any of them belonged to people he had known. The ships did not land immediately. Instead, they circled the colony for hours, scanning it with their instruments. Jake knew they were looking for signs of defensive preparations, counting the number of humans inside and planning their attack. They were careful hunters, and they did not like surprises, but Jake had prepared some surprises for them. When the first hunting party finally descended to the colony's surface, they found everything exactly as it had been 5 years ago. The same corridors, the same rooms, the same layout that had made their previous hunt so easy. But Jake had made changes that their sensors could not detect. The hunting party consisted of 12 Krillians, led by the same scarred creature that Jake remembered from the security footage. The monster was even larger than Jake remembered, with new scars covering its arms and fresh trophies hanging from its belt. This was Vexthul, the legendary hunter who had killed more humans than any other Krillian alive. Jake watched them through his hidden cameras as they moved through the colony entrance. They were confident, almost casual, as if they were returning to a familiar hunting ground. Vexthul made gestures to his followers, dividing them into groups that would search different sections of the station. They had done this many times before, and they expected it to be just as easy as always. The first group of 3 Krillians headed toward the residential section, where the colonists were hiding in their locked quarters. But they never made it that far. As they walked down the main corridor, the floor beneath them suddenly opened up. The hidden trapdoor that Jake had installed dropped them into a pit filled with razor wire and electrical charges. The screams that came from the pit were not human screams. They were the sounds that Krillians made when they were in pain, a deep growling noise that made the metal walls vibrate. Jake had never heard that sound before, and he found it very satisfying. The other Krillians heard the screams and rushed toward the sound, but Jake was ready for them too. As they approached the pit, hidden weapons emerged from the walls, and then ceiling. Automatic guns that Jake had designed specifically to penetrate Krillian armor opened fire from multiple directions. 2 more Krillians fell before the others could find cover. But these were experienced hunters, and they adapted quickly to the new situation. They began moving more carefully, checking every shadow, every corner, every possible hiding place for more traps. Vexthul roared something in the Krillian language. and Jake's implants translated the words automatically. The creature was angry, but it was also impressed. It had never encountered prey that could fight back so effectively. In the Krillian culture, this was worthy of respect. Jake smiled as he watched them from his hidden position. The hunters were finally learning what it felt like to be hunted. The remaining Krillians began to search the station more systematically. But Jake had advantages they could not match. He could see them through cameras placed in every room. He could move through maintenance tunnels that they did not even know existed. Most importantly, he could control every system in the colony from his command center in the depths of the station. When 3 Krillians entered the cafeteria, Jake sealed the doors and filled the room with poisonous gas. When 2 others tried to break into the residential section, Jake activated the electromagnetic fields that he had built into the walls. The fields interfered with their nervous systems and left them paralyzed long enough for Jake's automated weapons to finish them. One by one, the Krillian hunting party was reduced from 12 to 8, then to 5, then to 3. Each death was carefully planned and executed with cold precision. Jake was not just killing them. He was sending them a message. Vexthal finally understood what was happening. This was not a normal colony full of helpless humans. This was a trap, and somewhere in the station was a predator that was hunting his hunting party. The creature that had terrorized hundreds of worlds was finally experiencing fear. Jake could see that fear in the monster's yellow eyes as it searched desperately for its invisible enemy. Vexthal began calling out in the human language, challenging Jake to face him directly instead of hiding like a coward. But Jake was patient. He had waited 5 years for this moment, and he was not going to rush it now. The hunt was finally beginning, and this time Jake Morrison was the hunter. Jake Morrison moved through the maintenance tunnels like a ghost. Above him, the 3 remaining Krillians searched desperately for their invisible enemy. Vexthal was no longer the confident hunter who had entered the colony hours ago. The creature's yellow eyes darted from shadow to shadow, and its claws scraped nervously against the metal walls. Through his cameras, Jake watched as Vexthal discovered the bodies of his fallen warriors. The Krillian leader examined each corpse, carefully studying the wounds and the methods used to kill them. Jake had been very specific about how each hunter died. He wanted Vexthal to understand that this was not random violence. This was a carefully planned execution. The first group had been killed by traps, showing that their prey could think ahead and prepare for their arrival. The second group had been poisoned, proving that their enemy understood Krillian biology well enough to know exactly what chemicals would kill them. The third group had been electrocuted, demonstrating mastery over technology that the Krillians had never seen before. But the message that Jake really wanted to send was in the way he had arranged the bodies. Each corpse was positioned in a specific pattern that had meaning in Krillian culture. Jake had learned their customs during his 2 years of preparation, and now he was using that knowledge against them. The dead hunters were arranged to spell out words in the ancient Krillian language. The prey has become the predator. Vexthal stared at the message for a long time. Then he threw back his massive head and roared with a sound that shook the entire station. But it was not a roar of anger. It was a roar of recognition. The monster understood that he was facing something entirely new, something that his species had never encountered before. Jake smiled as he listened to that roar. He had spent 5 years dreaming of this moment, and it was even better than he had imagined. The 2 surviving hunters with Vexthal were younger and less experienced. They wanted to retreat to their ship and call for reinforcements, but their leader would not allow it. In Krillian culture, running away from prey was the greatest shame possible. Vexthal had built his reputation on never failing to complete a hunt, and he would rather die than lose that reputation now. But the younger hunters were afraid, and fear made them careless. When they entered the engineering section of the colony, they separated from their leader to search more ground quickly. Jake had been waiting for exactly this mistake. The first young hunter died when Jake dropped from a ceiling vent directly onto his back. The creature was strong, but Jake's enhanced muscles were stronger. His metallic skin protected him from the hunter's claws, and his modified bones did not break when the creature tried to crush him. The fight lasted only seconds before Jake's hands found the Krillian's throat. The second young hunter heard his companion's death cries and came running to help. But Jake was already gone, vanished back into the maze of tunnels and vents that only he knew how to navigate. The surviving hunter found only a corpse arranged in another insulting pattern, this one spelling out coward in the Krillian language. Now Vexthil was alone, the last survivor of his hunting party. The roles were completely reversed from 5 years ago, when Jake had been the only human left alive in the ruins of Colony 7. But this time, the hunter was the one hiding in the shadows, afraid of what might emerge from the darkness. Jake could have killed Vexthil at any time. His enhanced senses could track the creature's movements perfectly, and his weapons could strike from any direction. But he did not want a quick death for the monster that had haunted his nightmares. He wanted Vexthil to experience the same terror that Jake's friends had felt during their final moments. So Jake began to play with his prey. He would appear briefly at the end of a corridor, just long enough for Vexthil to see him, then disappear again before the creature could react. He would make sounds in the walls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. He would leave messages written in the Krillian language, taunting his former hunter with descriptions of how all his warriors had died. Dr. Lisa Harper watched Jake's progress from her hidden laboratory deep beneath the colony. She had been monitoring his vital signs and brain activity throughout the hunt, and what she saw worried her. Jake's body was performing perfectly, better than they had ever hoped when they designed his modifications. But his mind was changing in ways that she had not expected. The genetic treatments had been designed to enhance Jake's physical abilities and mental processing speed, but they had also affected his emotional reactions. The parts of his brain that controlled empathy and mercy were being suppressed by the enhanced sections that handled tactical thinking and predator instincts. Jake was becoming something that could kill without feeling guilt or hesitation. Lisa tried to contact Jake through his neural implants, but he ignored her messages. He was completely focused on his hunt, and nothing else in the universe seemed to matter to him. She realized with growing horror that she might have created something more dangerous than the Krillians themselves. Meanwhile, other Krillian hunting parties across the galaxy were receiving distress signals from Vexthil's ship. The messages were fragmentary and difficult to understand, but the basic facts were clear. An entire hunting party was being destroyed by a single human. The news sent shockwaves through Krillian society. For thousands of years, humans had been considered easy prey. They were weak, slow, and stupid compared to most species that the Krillians hunted. Human colonies were targeted by young hunters who needed to build their reputations with simple kills. The idea that a human could actually fight back successfully was almost impossible for most Krillians to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. Vexthil was one of their greatest hunters, a legend among his people. If he could be defeated by human prey, then everything the Krillians believed about humans was wrong. Some hunting parties began to avoid human colonies, choosing easier targets instead. Fear was spreading through their ranks like a disease. Back on Colony 7, Vexthil was discovering what that fear felt like. The creature had spent its entire life as the apex predator, the thing that other species ran from in terror. But now it was the one running, trying desperately to find a way to escape from an enemy it could not see or understand. Jake finally revealed himself in the same cafeteria where Ben Clark had died 5 years ago. He stepped out of the shadows and stood calmly in the center of the room, his blue eyes glowing in the dim light. He was no longer the frightened young man who had hidden in the maintenance tunnels. His body was larger and more muscular than any normal human, covered with skin that looked like flexible metal. When he moved, it was with the fluid grace of a perfect predator. Vexthul entered the cafeteria cautiously, his massive claws extended and ready for battle. When he saw Jake standing there, the creature stopped and studied his enemy carefully. This was not what he had expected to find. This thing looked human, but it felt dangerous in a way that no human had ever felt before. "You are the one who has been hunting my warriors," Vexthul said in heavily accented English. Jake nodded slowly. "Just like you hunted my friends." "Do you remember this room? This is where you killed Ben Clark. He was a good man who never hurt anyone, but you scanned him like he was an animal and added him to your collection." Vexthul Elo eyes narrowed. "You have become something new, something that should not exist. What are you?" Jake's smile was cold and predatory. "I am what humans become when you push us too far. I am evolution's answer to predators like you, and I am your death." The battle between Jake Morrison and Vexthul began without warning. The massive Krillian launched himself across the cafeteria with incredible speed, his razor-sharp claws aimed at Jake's throat. But Jake was no longer the slow human that Vexthul expected to find. His enhanced reflexes moved him out of the way just as those deadly claws swept through the air where his head had been. Jake rolled to the side and came up in a fighting stance that no human had ever used before. His modified muscles coiled like springs, and his glowing blue eyes tracked every movement of his enemy. When Vexthul spun around for another attack, Jake was ready for him. The two predators circled each other in the cafeteria, each looking for an opening to strike. Vexthul was larger and heavier, with natural weapons that had killed hundreds of victims. But Jake was faster and smarter, with enhancements that had been designed specifically to fight creatures like this one. Vexthul struck first, his claws whistling through the air in a pattern that would have cut a normal human into pieces. But Jake's metallic skin deflected the worst of the damage, and his enhanced bones did not break under the impact. Instead of backing away, Jake stepped forward and grabbed Vexthul's arm, using the creature's own momentum to throw him across the room. The Krillian crashed into a table with enough force to bend the metal, but he rolled to his feet immediately. For the first time in his long life as a hunter, Vexthul was fighting prey that could match his strength. The realization should have filled him with fear, but instead it excited him. This was the kind of battle that Krillian legends were made of. "You fight well for prey," Vexthul growled as he circled Jake again. "But you are still soft inside. Still weak where it matters." Jake did not reply. He had learned during his years of preparation that Krillians liked to talk during battle, trying to distract their enemies with words. But Jake was beyond distraction now. His enhanced mind processed combat information with cold efficiency, calculating angles and distances and probabilities of success. When Vexthul attacked again, Jake was ready. He ducked under the creature's swinging claws and drove his fist into the monster's ribs with enough force to crack the armor-like scales. Vexthul roared in pain and surprise, but Jake was already moving to his next target. His second punch hit the creature's knee, and there was a satisfying sound of breaking bone. But Vexthul was not finished. Even injured, the ancient hunter was still deadly. He caught Jake with a backhand blow that sent the enhanced human flying across the cafeteria. Jake hit the wall hard enough to leave a dent in the metal, but his modified body absorbed the impact without serious damage. The fight continued for several more minutes, with both combatants landing devastating blows. Jake's enhanced speed and strength were evenly matched against Vexthul's natural weapons and centuries of hunting experience. But slowly, Jake began to gain the advantage. His modifications were specifically designed to fight Krillians. While Vexthul had never faced anything like Jake before, the end came suddenly. Vexthul made a desperate lunge with both claws extended, putting all his remaining strength into one final attack. But Jake stepped aside at the last moment and grabbed the creature's arms, using Vexthul's own momentum to drive him forward into the metal wall. There was a wet sound as the Krillian's head hit the wall, and then Vexthul collapsed to the floor. Jake stood over his defeated enemy, breathing heavily but not seriously injured. Vexthul was still alive, but barely. The creature's yellow eyes looked up at Jake with an expression that might have been respect. "You have won," Vexthul whispered in his native language. "But what have you become to achieve this victory?" Jake knelt down beside the dying creature. "I became what I needed to become to stop you." Vexthul's breathing was getting weaker, but he managed to speak again. "You think you are still human, but look at yourself. Look at what you have done. You hunt now just as we hunt. You kill without mercy just as we kill. You have become the thing you hate." The words hit Jake harder than any physical blow could have. He looked at his hands, which were covered with Vexthul's blood. He thought about the way he had systematically killed the other hunters, enjoying their fear and pain. He remembered the cold satisfaction he had felt as he watched them die. "What does that make you now, human?" Vexthul asked with his final breath. The question echoed in Jake's mind as he watched the light fade from Vexthul's eyes. The legendary hunter was dead, but Jake felt no satisfaction in his victory. Instead, he felt empty, as if something important had been taken away from him. Dr. Lisa Harper found Jake sitting beside Vexthul's body an hour later. She had been monitoring the fight through the security cameras, and she had seen things that worried her greatly. The way Jake had moved during the battle was not human. The way he had enjoyed the other hunters' deaths was not human. The man she had helped to create was something entirely new. "Jake," she said softly as she entered the cafeteria, "it's over. You won." Jake looked up at her with his glowing blue eyes. "Did I? Or did I just prove that he was right?" Lisa sat down beside him, careful not to look too closely at Vexthul's corpse. "What do you mean?" "He said I had become like them, that I hunt and kill without mercy, just like they do. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'm not human anymore." Lisa studied Jake's face and saw the confusion there. The genetic modifications had enhanced his body and mind, but they had also changed his emotional responses. He was capable of things that no normal human could do, but he had lost some of the qualities that made humans special. "You're not the same person you were before," Lisa admitted. "The treatments changed you in ways we didn't fully understand. But you're still Jake Morrison inside. You still care about protecting innocent people. That's why you did all of this." Jake was quiet for a long time, thinking about her words. Finally, he stood up and walked to the cafeteria's main window. Outside, he could see the lights of the colony's residential section, where hundreds of families were sleeping safely in their beds. They would never know how close they had come to sharing the fate of the original colonists. "The other Krillian ships are leaving orbit," Lisa reported as she checked her instruments. "Word is spreading through their communication networks about what happened here. Some of their hunting parties are already avoiding human colonies." Jake nodded, but did not seem surprised. "Fear is a powerful teacher. They'll think twice before hunting humans again." Over the following months, reports came in from across the dim galaxy. Krillian hunting parties that had been terrorizing human colonies for decades were suddenly changing their patterns. Some were avoiding human settlements entirely. Others were seeking easier prey among species that had not yet learned to fight back. The legend of the human who had killed Vexthul spread through Krillian society like wildfire. Young hunters who had been planning to make their reputations by killing humans began to have second thoughts. The possibility of encountering another, evolved human made them look for safer targets. Jake established himself as the unofficial protector of the outer colonies. He remained hidden from most people, living in the shadows and maintenance tunnels of various stations. But when alien predators threatened human settlements, Jake would appear to drive them away. The colonists began to tell stories about their mysterious guardian, though few of them ever saw him directly. Dr. Lisa Harper continued to monitor Jake's condition from her laboratory. The genetic modifications were stable, and his enhanced abilities showed no signs of fading. But she worried about the psychological cost of his transformation. He had saved humanity from the Krillian threat, but he had sacrificed his own humanity to do it. Sometimes Jake would visit her laboratory late at night, when the colony was quiet and dark. They would talk about the old days, before the attack, when Jake had been just another colonist living a normal life. But those conversations always ended the same way, with Jake staring out at the stars and wondering what he had become. The galaxy was safer for humans now, but that safety had come at a price. Jake Morrison had evolved beyond human limitations to protect his species, but in doing so, he had become something that was no longer fully human. He was evolution's answer to an alien threat, a guardian standing watch over humanity's future. The predator had returned for revenge, but found that his prey had evolved into something he never expected. In the end, both hunter and hunted had been transformed by their conflict, and the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted forever.